When are you going to start recording? You want to let me know?
What's on now? Just gotta pull this up.
Are you going to edit it or something?
I'll go straight from the Rooty to the Tooty.
But we didn't start. It's recording?
It's recording, yeah.
Come on.
I go straight from the Rooty to the Tooty. People love authenticity.
Well, all right. Come on. Let's go.
Jesus.
I was itching and you told me I saw on my face. I was going to try to check it. But okay. All right. I'm ready. Hi, folks.
Oh boy, this is going to be interesting. So I guess I'll start with my regular peace. You're now tuned into episode 18 of #You Good Man. Listen, boy, this is going to be an episode full of controversy, and I feel like I need to prepare myself mentally for this. Yeah. So first, I guess I'll be a good host and acknowledge and introduce my co-host for this episode that'll be named at some point later. But this is Jaynay Johnson, marriage and family therapist, originally from Newark, New Jersey, who resides here. She wants to say she resides in Philadelphia, but it's like that outskirts, of Philadelphia. She is she's a teen and preteen. Did I get it right? Teen and preteen, because you don't want me to say child.
No, I don't.
Can't say child.
Right.
Okay, child and preteen, both boys and girls therapists.
Yes.
So, anything else I'm missing?
I'm an author.
Author.
You are forgetting that.
Promote it. Go ahead, do your thing.
So I'm an author. I have a book called Dear Teen Self, and it is a book based on my life and a lot of the poor choices I made as a teenager, but I talk to teenagers about how to not make the same poor choices and how to acknowledge the emotional turmoil that they're going through to make the poor choices to begin with. I also have a nonprofit called the Black Brain Campaign, and we work to erase the stigma of mental health in the Black community. And yeah, I love the color pink, although I don't have any pink on today.
You're forgetting professional nerve getter on her.
He's just a hater.
Am I? No, listen. We were supposed to be doing this for the longest time, but our schedule.
And who got you to do it today?
Listen, this is a beautiful office. You have me here in a place where if I get stopped by the cops, there's a high probability I may get shot. No, this isn't where they shoot people.
No, I mean
people that look like me. They're definitely stopping me. I look like I just got fresh out of jail. For people who don't know, say I got the new look with the little twist.
Yeah, let's just hope that wouldn't happen.
Yeah. I just make sure I get to the Negro part.
Okay.
Of the city.
Okay. It's not
quicker.
far.
Yeah, it's not far. So no. Outside of all the joking, this is somebody who I wanted to have on as a guest because we have such spirited dialogue about many issues, but in particular we have spirited dialogue about the idea of toxic masculinity and how it shows up in various arenas. And we'll be talking about how it shows up in popular culture. So we're talking about TV, we're talking about film, we're talking about music. I don't know her thoughts on the idea of toxic femininity, but definitely know her thoughts on toxic masculinity, because I think I don't want to speak for her, but I feel like every man walking might be slightly toxic in your opinion. Am I right? No, I don't want to paint you as being a man hater. No, not at all. And she's not. She's really a dope person.
Thank you. Do I think every man walking is toxic? No, but do I think that men have been groomed in rhetoric that is toxic? Absolutely. Do I think that they sometimes exhibit it without even recognizing that it can be toxic? Absolutely. I think the difference is those that can recognize it's toxic and work through it versus those that just act like it doesn't exist at all.
Okay. And toxic masculinity is one of those new buzzwords that's been real prevalent the last few years, especially with Trump being in office and what have you. So you could just let us know what your definition of toxic masculinity is.
Oh man, well, I think toxic masculinity has been here since the beginning of time. I just think we didn't have the language for it. But if you really look at history, you've always had men making the decisions, men controlling everything, and I think what makes it toxic is that either they get in their own way or they stand in the way of everyone else. Just like in administration, you have a bunch of men deciding what's happening with birth control and babies, and it's like, I don't even understand how y'all have this conversation, because y'all don't even have the parts to birth a baby. But for me, that's toxic. You just think you're the best. You think you're the only one that can make the decision. And it impacts everyone else around you. Now, that's probably no Webster's, definition. But that's just how I see it. It's to the point where you take your masculinity and you just infiltrate, no matter who it affects, no matter who you hurt, no matter what.
And I think that's the key part of it. It's just, unhealthy behaviors, whether it's a mindset that influences your actions, your behaviors, and negatively influences others as well. And so it's funny you mentioned that. I believe it was Kamala Harris who was grilling.
Loved it.
Yeah, grilling the newest Supreme Court justice. I found that whole process to be an exercise in futility, because he's going in regardless. And so I'm sitting there. I literally sat there yesterday and watched it for 2 hours, and I'm just like, this guy's, he's pretty much saying, listen, anything you ask me specifically, because I did hear that question, and it's just like, I've learned from the other Supreme Court justices, when they get up there, they're neither thumb up or thumb down to anything. And that's how he was answering. It was just like, well, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? All you have to do is check his track record. So when she did ask that question, it made me think about it, where it was just like, well, yeah, there's no laws or anything in place that's governing how a man runs his body, or any limitations to his body. And so I guess in that aspect, I can definitely see how historically, especially being in a patriarchal society, that it's been a lot of a toxic mentality where others weren't considered and continue not to be considered. So what about the idea of toxic femininity? Do you think that exists?
So I think that this is tricky for me. He's still a hater. I think that this is tricky because you want to look at, are women already oppressed and marginalized, right? And so I think because women are already oppressed and marginalized, that makes it hard for them to necessarily be toxic. In my opinion, I feel like it makes it hard for them to be toxic, because what is it that women actually have control over, like, serious control over, that's going to really impact masses and really harm masses? And do women really not think about the masses? I think it's probably the reverse. Women are probably always thinking about the masses and not really taking enough time to think about self. So for me, I feel like it's kind of hard for just on the larger scale. We can definitely isolate some situations and some incidents where women can operate in a toxic way.
Okay, and we'll definitely get to that. When we definitely hone into the pop culture aspect. And so what I think I hear you saying is, it's the idea where you hear from white people, well, black people are racist. And it was just, I hear a lot of people say, well, black people can't be racist. They can be prejudiced, but they can't be racist because, the oppressor or those who are oppressed can't oppress the oppressor.
Right.
So is that the same?
Same concept. Not unless all of, I guess, the oppressed, however you want to look at that, whether that's blacks,
feminism,
Mexicans, and
black feminism, when they all get together and... No, listen.
Still can't overthrow. And that's part of the thing. We still can't overthrow masculinity, because who has to join that fight with us? We have to get men to join in on that fight. But men don't see the point in doing that. They just see it kind of as like, y'all are just bashing. And you want to know why? Because men, for the most part, they benefit. They benefit from a world that is full of misogyny. And they benefit. Somebody said one time, and this may be off topic, but someone said one time that black straight men are like the white men. Yeah,
that's a meme.
Yeah, right.
I've seen it.
Okay, and while I know that really didn't sit well with a lot of people,
well, no, I think
when you really stop and you think about it, it's like, nah, that's true. That's like true. I don't want to believe it though, but it's true.
No, listen, I agree. I think for this week in particular, it's been eye-opening. The last 2 weeks, actually, I did a professional development for high school teachers on the idea of toxic masculinity. And initially, I was just like, I don't believe in terms. I don't believe in labels. I'm cool in that. And I still feel I don't. That's just me. I don't believe in terms, labels, and what have you. But in doing my research on it, it was certain things that I did agree with and not even agree with, I understood. And so when I say I understood, it's this idea of, we know that gender is a social construct, as they say, and that, masculinity and femininity are usually attached to genders, but in reality, that shouldn't be the case. When, because we look at the traits of masculinity, we look at, strong, we look at provider, we look at that tough, we, took a look at violence, aggressive. And women can be that too. Absolutely. And when we say femininity, we're talking about soft, we're talking about caring, we're talking about nurturing. Well, men can be that too. And so when I did the professional development, I showed a video which it had men reading. It was actually a commercial I saw last week, and I was just like, oh, this is just so fitting. It had men reading the definition of masculinity, and they were like, nah, this don't sound like me. And they had different types of men. They had gay men, they had trans men, they had so many different types of men, and they're like, no, this isn't me. What we're talking about is just ultimately being a decent human being and being caring for one another. And so when I say it was eye-opening for me, especially, it was a TED Talk that I watched. I believe his name was Jackson Katz, and he was talking about why domestic violence and sexual assault isn't necessarily a woman's issue. I mean, even though it impacts women, but it's a male issue. Yes. And what he did that was so poignant was he brought out, you being old school, he had a whiteboard. You like writing, you're just coming into computer eras. She's now transitioning to computers. Goodness. But what he did was he did an example of how it gets, toxic masculinity shows itself in different arenas. And so what he did was he wrote on the board, John beat Mary, right? And then, here we have a perfect sentence. We have John, the action is he beat who? He beat Mary. And so then it changed to be Mary was assaulted by John. And so what that did was, cognitively it changed how we looked at it, because now the emphasis is on Mary and John is at the end. And so but we still acknowledge that he's there. And then at the end of it, I believe it was Mary was assaulted. And then here we have John is nowhere to be found, and we just have Mary who, and then it's just like, all right, well, why are you acting like a victim and what have you, this victim mentality. And it took away the legitimacy of what happened and who indeed the perpetrator was. And then it was just so decent. I encourage everybody to go watch. I believe his name is Jackson Katz. And he just talked about how, when we're talking about changing to the narrative and men stepping up, he works for the Marines. He does different types of trainings and sports and what have you. And a lady came up to him and said, well, you do sensitivity training. And he was like, no, I don't do sensitivity training. I do leadership training. Because what we're talking about is people being leaders. We're talking, and I talked about this on my last podcast. We're talking about people stepping up and shunning the idea of toxic masculinity, no matter how uncomfortable it may make you feel, in order to progress. So, it made me start to buy in a little more into the idea of toxic masculinity, even though I do believe strongly that toxic femininity exists and it's utilized. We're talking about aggression. We're talking about, it might be covert aggression, but it's aggression nonetheless. So I do you think these terms are relevant in today's society? I think we already answered that pretty much, how relevant they are in understanding.
So that's an interesting question. I think they're relevant for growth, but I don't think that they have to remain the language we use, right? So I think it's important to call it what it is, but then say, okay, I'm just going to work on being a better person. But I think we get so stuck in the label and feeling that people are labeling us.
Oh, wait, so we can't get rid of labels and just say, listen, this is what it's like to be a dope person? Are you agreeing with me?
What I'm saying is, I think that the label is important to a certain extent.
So it's important. So let me just see if I understand.
Yes.
It's important to identify what the behavior is.
Acknowledge it, but
then
acknowledge your role, maybe in it. How you are. How you are perpetuating it, how you're teaching it, whatever it is. Acknowledge, right? And then from there, I think it doesn't have to be how you identify. Okay. If that makes any sense. But I think the problem with that is we can't get to that place of that's not how you identify because we are resistant to acknowledging that it exists. We're resistant to acknowledging we play a part in it.
Well, why do you think that is?
Well, guilt. People will feel guilty if they realize that I don't know if we can curse, but
listen, I'm a child of God. But however, you do your thing.
What? Dad.
No, do your thing. No,
No,
speak freely. Because this is about being honest and open.
All right, cool. So I think what happens is people feel shame when they realize, yo, I ain't been shit for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to that realization, it's like, how do I deal with that? Like, because we always want to place blame too. So if I realize that I haven't been that way, now who do I have to blame for it? Versus just looking at it and saying, these were some of the tools that I was taught. Because a lot of the things we learn don't just come from our parents. It comes from our friends. It comes from the things that we watch, the things we listen to. So instead of somebody just saying, okay, this has been surrounding me all of this time, I don't have to continue this. They just get stuck on the fact that they're involved in this, and then they just push it away, because what that means is they, for the most part, have to change. I don't want to say themselves, but the person they identify with may not be the same person once you realize, you know, you've been engaging in this and now you have to move forward. Which is, somebody posted on Facebook yesterday, like, why do you think, like, black people don't go to therapy? Do you think it's stigma, or do you think they just don't want to, like, do the work? And I she said something else, but I can't remember. And I just said, you know, I think people have a hard time knowing that when they go to therapy, it's going to bring up some stuff you probably don't want to remember, but then once you know better, you tend to want to do better. And then I think that also scares people, because it's like, if I begin to believe that everything that I believed is not true, that can be really earth-shattering, because now, while you may have evolved to a certain place, your family may not have. And so now, how do you deal with that when you're the evolved person in the family, but everybody else isn't? You know, and then your family's like calling you this or that, like, oh, you going, you know, and then they can start shaming you. And then it depends on how strong you are emotionally to be like, no, you know, it's okay, like, good change, you know, change is good. So I think that toxic masculinity is where it is, and relevant.
And femininity, correct?
And what was the definition? I feel like I would want to know what the sociological or psychological definition of toxic femininity is, because I feel like I've never researched it. So if you can find that,
because I feel like you're challenging my Google skills right now.
I'm not. I just want to know what the actual definition is. But I think that's the problem. I think the terms are relevant in terms of acknowledgement and in terms of growth. And I think that's why we're stuck. We won't acknowledge the terms.
Okay. Well, I mean, as that's loading, to make sure I get you the definition. No, I agree with you. I think I do think it's very difficult. You know, we're talking about first even recognizing that something exists, right? So I've always been one who's uncomfortable with certain conversations. It's funny, I just had one, right? I just had one, you know what I mean, where it was just like, yo, the hose was, and it was just like, ugh. You know, I'm in my head, I'm like, darn it, I don't. But did I say something enough to make me uncomfortable at that moment? I didn't, and I allowed it. I just tried to change the topic, like laugh it away, like, all right, go ahead, instead of confronting it. But I think that's one of the ways that we start to change the idea of toxic masculinity, because I don't want people to think that it's easy. Yes, because I'm a therapist and a mental health advocate. Listen, I do have relationships, and sometimes it makes you very uncomfortable, as you were saying, to try and, you know, even though I don't use that terminology, to begin to confront that. Because, you know, that might mean, listen, you might have to redefine friendships. You might have to, you might see your circle get smaller. You might see various things happen. And again, that's scary. And so especially when one of the aspects that I discussed was, because I talked about the intersectionality between black masculinity and toxic masculinity, a lot of times we're talking about survival, right? We're talking about survival in a sense where, listen, I said this yesterday on my other podcast, and my last podcast rather, you know, I met a brother in Chicago, and he was like, from Chicago, he got to be in his late 30s, early 40s, and he was like, he said, listen, man, when I was young, I wanted to participate in the arts and paint and, you know, dance and all these different things. He was like, yo, but you know what I mean? I'd have been a sucker. I would have been a target. You know, we talking about Chicago. I'm sure they had a couple hundred shootings this week. And he was just like, no, but the thing was, if we're talking about survival, we're talking about wanting to fit in. We all have this desire to belong.
I agree.
And so what makes more sense for me, what's more comfortable for me, to go along, and especially we're talking about a young person, because again, this just doesn't start in our adult years. This manifests way back. And so it was just like, yo, I had to be, you know, I felt like in order to be needed and be a part of something, I had to go that route and make unhealthy decisions, which landed me in jail. But now he has the wherewithal to recognize, I mean, even though I don't know him completely to even say that, but he just had an understanding of what that looked like for him at a young age. And I think especially a lot of our young brothers, they participate in these things because that's their environment. And then again, look at the people who we were calling nerds and corny and suckers, because they was outliers, right? Especially where I was from, and even growing up. And it was just like, well, why would you want to be that? Why wouldn't you want to fit in and be with the cool kids and be popular and not have people pick on you every day, right? So again, when we talk about survival, in a sense, we're talking about emotional survival, even if it's at the detriment of our long-term emotional survival.
Yeah, I mean, and here's a tidbit that you're gonna enjoy hearing me say. But I think that in that case, when rearing young children, that's where the woman also plays a really big role, because women also tend to tell their young boys, you know, don't cry, suck it up. They say things which I absolutely loathe. So if anybody says this, just please knock it off. You know, they tell their kids that they're the man of the house and you my boo and my boyfriend. Like, they're not. They're children. They need to be children. They need to not feel the burden of, quote unquote, being your man or being the man of the house. And I think that also plays into certain avenues of being toxic, because even when we look at black men from a personal perspective as a woman, there's this really high value on providing financially. And the woman not being able to question or do any of that. And I think that sometimes that starts at a young age, because if you have your mom, you know, maybe saying she's struggling or telling you that you're the man of the house, like you can feel that pressure to always provide. And I think men don't understand that there are so many ways you can provide, and that it's not just solely financial. And so for me, I don't like when moms and women do that, because boys have feelings too. So if they fall, they should cry. Like, let it out. Let them be able to come to you. Let them be nurturing. And so I think that women can sometimes play into that as well, because they have their own idea of masculinity. And so here's the funny thing. The funny thing is, I think a lot of people have a certain idea of masculinity or femininity when it comes to children. And then I think as people begin to grow up, it's like, oh, wait, these two concepts don't actually match. You know, when people are adults, or when these kids grow up and they're trying to be in a relationship and they're trying to navigate life. And I don't understand why it takes us so long to recognize that that isn't healthy. Like, it's not healthy to tell a young girl, hey, you live your whole life to be a good girl. You don't do this, you don't do that. But yeah, you tell a young boy, go live your life. Go get all the hoes, right? You know what they think, like, okay. But then it's like, you raise a girl, you know, you be a good girl. You don't do that. A man isn't gonna want you. But it's like, why is the conversation not the same? Why? And what's hurtful to me for young men and boys is, wow, your whole existence is only based on you getting chicks, huh? That's terrible. Yeah. That's like terrible.
And I think that's the idea.
Terrible.
That's the idea of. But again, you know, it's so many things that go into that.
It's a lot of layers.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of layers.
It still exists, though.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. But I think
he be trying to act like he was. Let me tell y'all something, because he being real nice and professional right now, which I am like shocked by. But anyway, he has been going on and on and on for weeks about how toxic masculinity isn't a thing.
I didn't say it wasn't a thing. I said I just don't believe in labels.
Is that toxic? Exactly.
That's
Not
not
even
toxic.
wanting to acknowledge.
I just look at people as being
that
human. I look
it
at
was-
human beings.
But
That's
like,
the thing. I
but
look
like
at human beings.
But like I tell you all the time, and these lovely people are going to see me tell you again. You can't, just because you see it that way, you can't try to erase the fact that it exists out in the world.
I'm not trying to do that, but what I'm saying is, and I think that's the idea.
And you still got to acknowledge
that's where
it,
masculinity
like,
and toxic masculinity and femininity. I'm gonna give you the definition that you were looking for, and I think it goes further to prove my point.
We'll see.
That matter of fact, let's go to this first. So we're talking about. So this defines it as unbalanced feminine energy because of its inward focus moves in an inward fashion. Guilt, depression, anxiety, lack of self-worth, bitterness, spite, jealousy, passive aggressiveness, or clingy behaviors. Then it says also self-destructive, inwardly directed energy that projects this inner pain upon others. It's a cry for help for someone who struggles with core survival issues such as self-worth, self-acceptance, and self-love. But I think the key part that they say here is that this exists in men and women. And so when I look at and this goes to my overarching point, and then I'm going to hit you with the booyah, right? My overarching point that we're talking about human beings at the end of the day. We're not talking about, I don't want to attribute it to a gender or what have you. We're just talking about what can you do? What energy do you possess that is making you an unhealthy person, right? Regardless of gender, and what needs to take place to make you a healthy individual. And so, again, regardless of man or woman, because men and women, we both have that type of energy. Like that's, again, when we say toxic masculinity, we have these ideas and attribute it to men because yes, we do have testosterone, which impacts our level of aggression and our sexual virility and what have you. That was a big word right there. Shout me out. But
okay, with your GRE words.
my GRE words. No, but women possess this as well. That's why you have some women who are quote unquote more masculine than others, right? Okay. And so again, that goes to my overarching point of, listen, we're talking about human behavior at the end of the day. And so yes, one gender, because it has a bat and balls, right? That energy you may see it a little bit more in that arena. Because they're the ones who have been controlling society for the longest time. And
that's just the essence of it. So no one is trying to say that your toxic femininity doesn't exist. What we are saying and what women are saying is that historically, because you guys have had power, right? It has also snowballed to make it toxic. And it's going to take a lot more unraveling than what toxic femininity, please,
I'm listening to you.
than what toxic femininity, right, has really done. And so even when you were reading it, I just kept thinking, I wonder if this is a result of women never really having space. Women never really had space, right? So there's a big deal. This conversation is always dumb to me, but here we are. People have this conversation about like divorce and women leaving, and men like, see, women don't ride no more. Oh, let's be clear about what women were riding through before. Women were riding through you having your family here and your family on the other side of town. But because they never had skills, because women weren't treated like that, they couldn't leave the house. There was nothing for them to do because they had no financial stability, right? Back in the day, women stayed home. They made the clothes. They probably could have had businesses or whatever, but was that really part of what's going on? No. So men are like mad now that women are leaving for stuff that they've been doing for generations. But guess what? They've been doing it for generations. They're not even trying to stop doing what they did for generations. They just want the women to stop leaving. Tell me. Go ahead and tell me I'm wrong. And tell me that is not some toxic thinking.
I agree.
You're not even saying to yourself, maybe I should stop cheating. Maybe I should stop being a piece of whatever that looks like, because that could look very different. Instead, it's woman stay and deal with it. And so when you were talking about a woman being clingy and, and doing all of that, that could drive someone mad that you took vows, that you decided that you're blatant with you're blatantly deciding to be disrespectful. And to throw salt to injury, you want me to just stay and deal with the disrespect and you not change?
Listen,
I'm just saying.
You're not going to hear an argument from me. I definitely understand.
I'm glad I won't hear an argument from you.
I understand. So let's move on. Let's move on. So as far as
blood hot, go ahead.
No, that's the lack of AC in this room. But I digress.
Cool. You hot?
Yeah, I'm hot.
I'm kind of cool, but this conversation is rubbing me in.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get into what toxicity looks like in popular culture. And when we say popular culture, we're talking about TV, films, music, literature. I'm guessing. So what are your thoughts on just how it presents itself?
It presents itself in so many ways. I think the biggest thing I'm seeing now is men have this overwhelming desire of liking like lighter skinned women with like certain body types. Why you looking like that?
I'm listening to you. I'm
Right.
trying to see where you're taking this.
And so I have seen a lot of this on social media where guys are making comments. This one guy is like laying on a girl and she's beautiful brown girl, and people are in the comments like, this picture would be better with a light skinned chick. Like, oh no, she need to bleach her skin. She need to do da-da-da-da. Now, to me, that's on social media. And to me, that's like toxic thinking. Because you are men in certain ways, or in women. Because there were women also on the thread saying nasty, negative things about this girl. I feel like we've gotten to this place where we only look at one type of person as like beautiful. When that's really not even like the whole gamut of what beauty looks like. And I think that itself is toxic, because there's people walking around here with a bunch of different shades, and I think that in the way that we treat them is a result of our toxic thinking and thinking that this is one set ideal. And I think that even when you're raising children, right, that becomes a whole nother thing. Like it's just, that to me is just very toxic, the way that we are portraying what beauty standards are.
Well, I think that's been that way for a long period of time now.
I'm not disagreeing, but I feel like, why aren't we moving forward? Like, that's a thought that I often had. Yes, well, we've had this, and it's like, why aren't we moving forward? Why?
So I think we have to look at first you got to look at, who's in control, right? Who's in control of the... let's go to film. Let's go to TV. Let's go to TV.
Okay.
Right? I'm always a fan to go to TV.
Let's go to TV.
How especially if we're talking about representation, right? First off, we know that there's the European standard of beauty continues to exist, continues to thrive in our culture and other cultures, and that's the standard, right? We see it with the foot up. I'm still trying to figure out. Maybe you could school me at the end of it. When y'all take pictures now, y'all gotta have y'all heel off the ground. I don't know what that's about, but I see women do that in every picture. But I digress.
I do it because I'm short, and so it gives
what does
me
that do? No, that doesn't do anything.
It
like
does.
what does it do?
Whatever. He's a hater. He doesn't.
What is I'm a hater. See, we're so quick to go to hater, right? When you're instead of trying to understand what's happening. Why can't I just be a brother that wants to understand why y'all both around like this? Why y'all just taking pictures?
I don't do that. I don't do it with both of my legs.
You do it with one? Is that what the...
I do like it's called like a leg pop.
All right.
And I do it with one. I'm not standing on both of my tippy toes for no picture.
But I think that goes, and I was joking with that, because I had to ask my homegirl that earlier, what's the point of that? But again, I think we get into this things that become trend, right? It becomes trendy, so we can't expect body types not to become trendy, and everything else that happens become trendy. We would like to think that we're so evolved as people, but again, people try to keep up with the Joneses, right?
Well,
and whatever's working, it keeps going. And so if we see this idea of beauty is, okay, I'm standing here like a mannequin when I take a picture, like many women do. Y'all don't do that? The Beyonce...
Yeah, I'm just bad at like taking pictures.
No, I'm just saying though, but but I'm saying though, like we follow this trend, so I'm not surprised, and I don't want to necessarily attribute it to men as to the reason why, certain body types, certain complexions are lauded and others aren't, because I think again, women are the biggest haters of women, and light-skinned women hating dark-skinned women. I mean, that's been happening since the beginning of time. Yes. That goes back to the slave owners and what have you, and you would hope that we evolve. But I think when we think about who's in control, who's presenting these people to us. So I try to think about the black TV networks, right? So I automatically go to the Queen Oprah. I go to Queen Oprah. I don't watch the one show. What's that show that everybody watch?
I don't know. I watch Greenleaf, and that's my show.
But they got different complexions in that show.
Yes.
All right, they got different complexions in that show. So we go to what's the Kofi Khan guy?
Queen Sugar. I haven't watched it.
Okay, so I'm guessing.
But I think it's mixed too.
We go to Love Is, and my man Yasir. Shout out to the brother. Shout out to the brother. You know, we look and we see a multitude of complexions there. So I think when we're talking about African Americans and we control the narrative as what's being promoted, I think we do see more us. Now, music videos don't exist anymore,
I'm not disagreeing with you, but on social media, I think social media is way more influential than people are actually even really paying attention to, and that's where the issue. I don't want to say lies, but when there are black boys. I had a conversation with this guy once, and he was we were, I don't know, it was at a wedding. It was a random conversation, but we had the conversation about how black girls struggle with love interest and dating, right? Because one, a lot of black women don't feel that black men are necessarily interested in them, right? And him and I were having this conversation because he was like, yeah, I understand that. He was like, but I'm still going to post the baddie. Like, and he was dead serious. Like, I'm still going to post the light-skinned John, that's probably half naked on my page. And he was like, so I'm probably guilty of all the brown girls who probably follow me and think I probably don't like brown girls because I never post them.
About it. So does he have to post about them to show that he likes them? Or can he post what gives him an erection?
So here's what I think happened. He's attracted to black girls, but he only posts the light girls. And so the reason why I think that matters is because we can act like we can have other thoughts, but what we show and what we represent is still leaving an imprint out on the world. And I think that that's part of what we're seeing. And that's the thing. I think it's like one of those hidden things that we think, okay, well, because I'm not posting it doesn't mean I don't like it. But it's like, but if you're always posting this, it seems like this is a higher preference, but I think higher precedence. And then for everybody else who is looking and paying attention, it just impacts self-esteem.
Yeah, and but I think that's where we go. I think that's where people, sell themselves short. Those who are viewing it, and I did that for the longest time.
I wouldn't disagree with you.
Again, when we talk about people only posting their wins and not posting their losses, I think that goes the same with that. Listen. Yeah, I might see. I rarely post, other women or what have you, But if I do post Michelle Weaver, or whoever, right? It's that might just be what I'm feeling right then. Like, oh dang, I like her. Let me WCW see if she might like this pic. It might be nothing in behind it, but I think we automatically. Put people in a box and we make assumptions about their character, about what they do. Now, I'm not one to say that I don't believe that you can't tell a lot about a person from their social media. I'm not going to say that because I think you do. I think you could definitely tell. Okay. But I don't think that shows you the whole picture. I think that's just a part of it. And it's not my responsibility, it's, to try to make you feel comfortable in who you are. Because I might post a picture of, of the same type of woman all the time. You know what? That could just be my twist.
But I think, and nobody's saying it's your responsibility. But I can't stand when men act like they don't understand why black women feel black men don't want them. That's the part that gets me. Nobody is saying.
Well, I've concluded. You know what I've concluded?
Nobody is saying don't do you. But I think
y'all have a local y'all have a local mentality, man. I'm you know what? And I said this so many times.
Y'all
have a local mentality. Like I see this idea. Listen, I love Queens. I love all complexions. Chocolate.
Don't try to clean it up now. Go ahead and say.
When I say a local mentality, I'm just like we put this idea of black men in a box. Like I was